Happy Easter, happy Pesach. Good morning, upper room. I'm going to call the Zoom audience the upper room. What a day here in Vermont. I welcome. This is a very exciting day because we have two congregations melded this morning in person. Welcome, Chester congregation. I'm going to raise your hand just so I can see all of you. Yes, well represented. Wonderful. Tina, wonderful to see you here. You're usually on Zoom, so it's lovely. I want to also especially thank Val, the musician from the Chester Church, who's playing the piano for us today. There are several of us that made a personal request to make sure she was here. In addition to Julaine and the virtual choir's wonderful music. Also on the upper room, I see that the filing places are well represented. Helen of Norwich, England is up there. Evansville, Indiana is represented. The Brooklyn Jewish community is well represented by my beloved Sharon. Baltimore, Chicago. Welcome all of you. And many others, but I can't see all of them. Any other towns that you recognize, June?
New Hampshire, not New Hampshire, Massachusetts.
Yep. Yeah.
And yeah, Anne, and is Anne Marie here from? No.
Okay, let's move on. Am I on this thing too?
You're on both.
I'm on both. Okay. Do I need to play with it or just try to ignore it? Sorry, this is new.
Is it in your way?
Welcome, everybody. Come in, come in. There are plenty of seats up here.
How's that? Is that your way?
Yeah.
Okay.
Better.
This is just for the speakers. This is for the Zoom people.
Okay. Got it. Oh, wonderful. We have multiple species with us this morning as well. You know, in England, they bring their dogs everywhere, including to church, with no question. There's always dogs in the aisle of the churches where I've preached.
She brought it last year in Chester. She loved it so much. She wanted to come back.
All right. All right. A repeat. That's wonderful. Are you happy over there? You could, there's, okay.
I'm all alone.
It's all right. You're not all alone, Tina. There are plenty. Let us begin our worship service this morning. May we open in this Passover on this Easter morning. May we be open to the possibility which can emerge from long suffering and grave injustice. The possibility of new life, of more perfect love. May we speak together this morning of deliverance, the art of resurrection, personally and politically. May we speak of our hopes as we are flung from a time of profound and permanent alteration into an unknown future. Amen. And we begin with the hymn number 12, O Life That Maketh All Things New. The words will be up on the screen as well, and you all have hymnals. Do you have hymnals over there? Yeah.
You have
So, Springfield has a tradition of stories for all ages, and I have all year come with adult poetry, but this year I actually have a story for all ages, and it is The Velveteen Rabbit. I'm reading only the first part of it. The second part of it gets theologically complicated for Unitarians, so I'm staying with just the first half. And I am going to read it. Usually I tell children's stories, but it's so beautifully written. I'm going to read it with selected portions. There once was a velveteen rabbit, and in the beginning he was really splendid. He was fat and bunchy as a rabbit should be. His coat was spotted brown and white. He had real thread whiskers, and his ears were lined with pink satin. On Christmas morning, when he sat wedged in the top of the boy's stocking with a sprig of holly between his paws, the effect was charming. For at least 2 hours, the boy loved him. And then aunts and uncles came to dinner, and there was a great rustling of tissue paper and unwrapping of parcels. And in the excitement of looking at all the new presents, the Velveteen Rabbit was forgotten. For a long time, he lived in the toy cupboard on the nursery floor, and no one thought very much about him. He was naturally shy, and being only made of velveteen, some of the more expensive toys quite snubbed him. The mechanical toys were very superior and looked down upon everyone else. They were full of modern ideas and pretended they were real. Between them all, the poor little rabbit was made to feel himself very insignificant and commonplace. And the only person who was kind to him at all was the skin horse. The skin horse had lived longer in the nursery than any of the others. He was so old that his brown coat was bald in patches and showed the seams underneath, and most of the hairs in his tail had been pulled out to string bead necklaces. He was wise, for he had seen a long succession of mechanical toys arrive to boast and swagger, and by break their mainsprings and pass away. And he knew that they were only toys and would never turn into anything else. For nursery magic is very strange and wonderful. And only those playthings that are old and wise and experienced, like the skin horse, understand all about it. What is real? Asked the rabbit one day, when they were lying side by side near the nursery fender. Does it mean having things that buzz inside you and a stick-out handle? Real isn't how you are made, said the skin horse. It's a thing that happens to you. When a child loves you for a long, long time, not just to play with, but really loves you, then you become real. Does it hurt? Said the rabbit. Sometimes, said the skin horse, for he was always truthful. When you are real, you don't mind being hurt. Well, does it happen all at once, like being wound up, he asked, or bit by bit? It doesn't happen all at once, said the skin horse. You become. It takes a long time. That's why it doesn't often happen to people who break easily, or have sharp edges, or who have to be carefully kept. Generally, by the time you are real, most of your hair has been loved off, and your eyes drop out, and you get loose in the joints and very shabby. But these things don't matter at all, because once you are real, you can't be ugly, except to people who don't understand. I suppose you are real, said the rabbit, and then he wished he had not said it. For he thought the skin horse might be sensitive, but the skin horse only smiled. The boy's uncle made me real, he said. That was a great many years ago, but once you are real, you can't become unreal again. It lasts for always. The rabbit sighed. He thought it would be a long time before this magic called real happened to him. One evening, when the boy was going to bed, he couldn't find the china dog that always slept with him. Nana was in a hurry, and it was too much trouble to hunt for china dogs at bedtime. So she simply looked about her, and seeing that the toy cupboard door stood open, she made a swoop. Here, she said, take your old bunny. He'll do to sleep with you. And she dragged the rabbit out by one ear and put him into the boy's arms. That night, and for many nights after, the Velveteen Rabbit slept in the boy's bed. At the first, he found it rather uncomfortable, for the boy hugged him very tight, and sometimes he rolled over on him, and sometimes he pushed him so far under the pillow that the rabbit could scarcely breathe. But very soon he grew to like it, for the boy used to talk to him and made nice tunnels for him under the bedclothes that he said were like the burrows the real rabbits lived in. And when the boy dropped off to sleep, the rabbit would snuggle down close under his little warm chin and dream, with the boy's hands clasped close around him all night long. And so time went on, and the little rabbit was very happy, so happy that he never noticed how his beautiful velveteen fur was getting shabbier and shabbier, and his tail coming unsewn, and all the pink rubbed off his nose where the boy had kissed him. Spring came, and they had long days in the garden, for wherever the boy went, the rabbit went too. And once, when the boy was called away suddenly to go out to tea, the rabbit was left out on the lawn until long after dusk, and Nana had to come and look for him with a candle because the boy couldn't go to sleep unless he was there. He was wet through with the dew and quite earthy from diving into the burrows the boy had made for him in the flower bed. And Nana grumbled as she rubbed him off with the corner of her apron. "You must have your old bunny," she said. "Fancy all that fuss for a toy." The boy sat up in bed and stretched out his hands. "Give me my bunny," he said. "You mustn't say that. He isn't a toy. He's real." When the little rabbit heard that, he was happy, for he knew that what the skin horse had said was true at last. The nursery magic had happened to him, and he was a toy no longer. He was real. The boy himself had made it so.
Please join me in reciting our affirmation that will be right up there. Love is the doctrine of this church. The quest for truth is its sacrament, and service is its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge in freedom, to serve the needs of all beings, to the end that all souls shall grow into harmony with the divine. Thus do we covenant with each other and with the source of our being. Thank you for sharing that with me. And now is the time for the offering and sharing in the ongoing work of this church, and with the ongoing work of the Family Center with food and toiletries. Thank you. Are you doing music? Valerie, of course. Thank you.
All right, we have quite a few readings this morning. Well, before I get to the readings, though, I have a few prefaces. The first is that, as many of you know, I really love preaching on Easter, and I love preaching from the Easter story. However, I also always put a caveat that Easter for the Jewish, our Jewish friends, is very difficult because it associates with pogroms. Not that there weren't pogroms not on Easter, but Easter often provoked them. A minister would tell the Easter story, including the horrible lie that the Jews killed Jesus. And then after church, the men of the church would go over to the nearest small Jewish village and kill all the men, women, and children. So I say that, I put that out there to the other preface I want to make is that there is no historical evidence for any of the stories that I'm talking about this morning. Neither the Passover story nor the crucifixion and resurrection of Jesus. There's no historical evidence that Jews were slaves in Egypt. We know almost nothing about Jesus, the rabbi. We do know that he was crucified by the Romans. That's almost all we know about him. Josephus told us that. Both of these stories, the Passover story and the Easter story, are myths. And the word myth in the English language, at least in the United States, has come to mean something not true, but that's not true. Myths are very true. They are true to the human heart. They are true to the human species. It helps us understand who we are and how we are to manage this difficult thing called life. Myths are often truer than fact. Again, truer to the values, truer to the human heart that the storytellers are trying to teach. Rich in metaphor, they help us live lives that matter. So when I'm speaking about the biblical text this morning, please understand this, that I'm coming from not from a literalist point of view. However, there are many, I have to say, Unitarian Universalists and others who think that because it's not literally true, we throw it out. And as far as I'm concerned, to give the Hebrew and Greek scriptures over to the literalists is to give over one of the great heritages, a great and richest part of our heritage, over to people with whom we deeply disagree. Finally, another historical note, Jesus was a Jewish rabbi, full stop. The Gospels are written by no one who knew him. They were written 70 and 100 years after his death. They were written to distinguish one Jewish sect, the one who thought the rabbi Jesus was the Messiah, from the other Jewish sects. Those sects had decided to keep looking for the Messiah. That is to say, Christianity happened generations later. Nonetheless, it turns out that much of what the rabbi Jesus is said to have said, although we, again, know nothing historically is proven of what he said, whether he said it or not, whether Matthew, the Sermon on the Mount, was made up by whoever this person named Matthew was, still his teachings were quite beautiful. They were consistent with Jewish tradition at the time and are worthy, of course, of our attention. Those are my prefaces. And now we will move to 3 poems and a biblical reading. The first poem is my own. As some of you have heard it, it's called April. Why was it again that April is the cruelest month? Why was it that the wings of death passed over certain households in this particular time of year? And what is it exactly we, the living, are supposed to do with our salvaged, resurrected lives? With snow melting around crocuses, with the long days stretching across matted leaves and half-frozen, forgotten toys, April becomes those possibilities first revealed as loss. In the clarity of the equinox, in the wandering scent of hyacinths, in the birthing of lambs in our midst. For this, God passed us by. For this. I do not want to skip over the cruel desert on the way to home, the Friday before the Sunday, the dark grief before the winter's passing. These April days I want to hold with my fullest heart, not as regrets, but as themselves, nurturing the seeds and roots that will burst forth for those of us passed over again this year. I want to cherish these days that guarantee our salvation, secure our covenant, bring us into the light of another summered year. I want to feel the losses, and in the midst of the terrible passage, have the courage to wave the innocent comet on her infinite way. And another Passover Easter poem called The Gardener by Robin Becker. The gardener. She works and works against sadness, stilling grief with a spade. Only the dead have come home to their faithful hungers, and in spring, when they speak, she opens the ground and puts in something green the dead can climb. Small pine and spruce in their poor burlap, lilacs, dogwood. She thinks of catkins softening the air and the lost dog who listened with his nose. She leans against his body, the weight of her love, and walks through a forest dim behind cataracts, but luminous in a memory her grandmother conjured tree by tree. She cuts back the grapevines and clears the roses, taking the curse out of the stiff ground. Isn't that beautiful? I just have to repeat this one line. She opens the ground and puts in something green the dead can climb. Thank you, Robin Becker, for that. And this poem by Maya Angelou, Still I Rise. I have read this poem many, many times. And when I reread it this week, I thought this is a Passover Easter poem in a way that seems obvious to me now, but I don't think I have thought of it that way in the past. I'm not going to read the entire thing with apologies to Maya Angelou. I think she will forgive me, but she might not. So think Passover and Easter. Still I rise. You may write me down in history with your bitter, twisted lies. You may trod me in the very dirt, but still, like dust, I'll rise. Just like moons and like suns, with the certainty of tides, just like hope springing high, still I'll rise. Out of the huts of history's shame, I rise. Up from the past that's rooted in pain, I rise. I'm a black ocean leaping and wide, welling and swelling, I bear in the tide. Leaving behind nights of terror and fear, I rise. Into a daybreak that's wondrously clear, I rise. Bringing the gifts that my ancestors gave. I am the dream and the hope of the slave. I rise, I rise, I rise. And now for the Greek scripture readings. First is from the book of John, which was written 100 years after Jesus died, John 20, verse 1 through 16. Mary stood weeping outside the tomb, and as she wept, she stooped to look into the tomb and saw two angels in white, sitting where the body of Jesus had lain, one at the head and the other at the feet. They said to her, "Woman, why are you weeping?" She said to them, "Because they have taken my Lord, and I do not know where they have laid him." Saying this, she turned around and saw Jesus standing, but she did not know that it was Jesus. Jesus said to her, "Woman, why are you weeping? Whom do you seek?" Supposing him to be the gardener, she said to him, "Sir, if you have carried him away, tell me where you have laid him, and I will take him away." Jesus said to her, "Mary." She turned and said to him, "Rabbi." The second reading is from Luke 24, 13 through 31. About 7 miles from Jerusalem, on the same day the women found the tomb empty, the first day of the week, 2 men were talking with each other about all the things that had happened. While they were talking and discussing, Jesus himself came near and went with them, but their eyes were kept from recognizing him. They did not look up. And he said to them, "What are you discussing with each other while you walk along?" They stood still, looking sad. Then one of them answered him, "Are you the only stranger in Jerusalem who does not know the things that have taken place there in these days?" He asked them, "What things?" They replied, "The things about Jesus of Nazareth, and how he was handed over to be condemned to death and crucified him, and the state crucified him. But we had hoped that he was the one to redeem Israel." Then, beginning with Moses and all the prophets, Jesus interpreted to them the things about himself in all the scriptures. As they came near the village to which they were going, he walked ahead as if he were going on, but they urged him strongly, saying, "Stay with us, because it is almost evening and the day is now nearly over." So he went to stay with them. When he was at the table with them, he took bread, blessed and broke it, and gave it to them. Then their eyes were opened, and they recognized him. And then he vanished from their sight. Here endeth the readings. Please join me in the spirit of meditation. April, dear April, here in all your glory, you cruel, unpredictable ghost of winter past, you redeemer of an earth not yet, but almost resurrected, impassable mud roads where ice sheets persist in your lengthening days. You pull on our faith. Such grotesque finalities. Yet on that briefly sunlit morning of yours, was it just yesterday, as I gazed out my study window, your sun rose with such warmth that the air lifted the water from the pond. And in the midst of sorrow, there was gratitude and a glimmer of light. Spirit of silent forgiveness and renewing peace. Force of rebirth, be with us now as we open our hearts to our sorrows and our joys, to rest in your love for just this moment in time, that we might remember the awakening paradise in which you have placed us with such care, that we might renew our openness to its healing powers and its infinite light. In silent communion with you, with each other, and with every living creature on this blessed earth, let us find the blossoming of our gratitude and the rebirth of your grace. So I should say that my mother wove this stole for me for my ordination, 1993. And she is with our family always, especially when we buy new shoes. They're always from Gaga. This morning's reflection is about rising. Water rising from a pond, peoples rising from slavery, truth rising from injustice, love rising from fear, crocuses rising so mightily that they cut through the wintered leaves. And of course, it is a call to gratitude, as is all meaningful worship, a call to look up, to rise up, to stand in the light. Today is Passover, Ramadan, and Easter. And it is also the 158th anniversary of the end of the United States Civil War.
Sorry, technical difficulties.
We will now take a moment's break for technical difficulties. Can people still hear me?
Yeah.
Well, I know you can hear me.
Yes, we can still hear you.
Okay. Sorry.
That's all right. Can I keep talking
You
though?
can keep talking. I'll get you on camera in a second.
Okay. The end of the Civil War. And may I remind you what that meant? It was the end of the Confederacy, and I'm going to read words that are difficult to read, but they need to be read. In the words of the Confederate Vice President Alexander Stephens, the Confederacy was built upon, quote, the great truth that the Negro is not equal to the white man, that slavery, subordination to the superior race, is his natural and normal condition. It was only 158 years ago that the Civil War ended. I thought it relevant to read that passage this morning. Truth crucified by hate. So that's the preface. I have a lot of prefaces this morning. Let's start with the Passover. Another story of slavery. Passover is a stunning account of God coming into time, intervening in history, bringing the Jews who were oppressed in slavery in Egypt, bringing them out of slavery through the desert for 40 years into freedom. As told at the Seder tables worldwide, the celebration of Passover is a ritual, a celebration of remembrance and gratitude. It is also a call for justice for all enslaved and oppressed people, with particular compassion for the refugee, the homeless, the lost, the stranger. And these days, every year, it seems the ritual of the Seder becomes more and more important as our world becomes more and more homeless. I want to quote a passage from Marge Percy's poem, Magid. She's written beautiful Passover. She's written a whole Haggadah. She's a poet, lives in Wellfleet, Massachusetts. Just read a little bit about her description, or her imagining what it must be like to flee a country, your home, as the Jews had to flee Egypt. The courage to let go of the door, the handle, the courage to shed the familiar walls whose very stains and leaks are comfortable as the little moles of that upper arm, stains that recall a feast, a child's naughtiness, a loud blistering storm that slapped the roof hard, pouring through. The courage to abandon the graves dug into the hill, the small bones of children and the brittle bones of the old whose marrow hunger had stolen. The courage to desert the tree planted and only begun to bear, the riverside where promises were shaped, the street where their empty pots were broken. The courage to walk out of the pain that is known into the pain that cannot be imagined, mapless, walking into the wilderness, going barefoot with a canteen into the desert, stuffed in the stinking hold of a rotting ship sailing off the map into dragons' mouths. India, Serbia. We could list how many countries today. And so they walked out of Egypt. So they bribed their way out of Russia under loaves of straw. So they steamed out of the bloody, smoking charnel house of Europe on overloaded freighters, forbidden all ports. Above all, Passover is about gratitude, the deepest. It's the time of deepest gratitude. The most popular song, or one of the most popular songs, is Dayenu, and it's a song of gratitude. It would have been enough. It would have been enough if you had just brought us out of Egypt. It would have been enough if you had given us health and wealth. It would have been enough if you had split the sea for us, if you had fed us manna. It would have been enough if you had just given us Shabbat, if you had led us to Mount Sinai, etc. This long list, and followed each time by Dayenu, it would have been enough. A gratitude song of the deepest and joyous feeling. And finally, Passover is a time not only of remembering, but of ritual enactment. And I want to quote a quote from Rabbi Adina Allen, given to me by my friend Randy, who I will talk about in a minute, at her Passover. It was the cries of the Israelites under the weight of their suffering that awakened the divine energy within the universe and within themselves. The parting of the sea, salt water split to reveal soft, sandy passage. And then I'm skipping a little. To prepare for Passover is to prepare to dip bitter herbs into salty waters, salt waters of tears and of the sea. Like magic, like a sacred spell, suddenly the briny bowl on the table becomes the waters of creation. And then at the end, she says, to dip and eat these potent symbols is also to say, everything that happened then and there is happening now and here. Outside and inside us. Everything is everything. All possibilities and potentialities exist. I was blessed with attending or being part of Randy Stein's Seder, and Randy's here on the upper room with us this morning. She's a regular on the Zoom audience, both in Chester and here. And she, during the Seder, she did this lovely thing. She invited us all to speak to questions that she had posed to us. And again, the Seder is, if you haven't ever been to a Seder, get yourself invited. Because it's participatory, and it's and Randy did it so beautifully, inviting us to answer these questions ourselves, and as we wish to share with the gathering around the table. So these are some of the questions that she asked us to entertain. Since the Seder is the story of the Passover, the story of leaving, she asked us, what have we left? What have we left recently? And I ask you this to think, what have you left? A job, a marriage, a community? And what was oppressive about it that caused you to leave? And when you had left, when you're in the wilderness of that transition before the new life has begun, the 40 years in the wilderness, were you tempted to go back, as many of the Jews were in the wilderness, begging Moses to lead them back, because at least they knew what slavery was and did not know what was coming at them? The desolation of the darkness. Again, Rabbi Alina Allen, everything that happened then and there is happening now and here. Again, the power of metaphor and ritual to help us look at ourselves in the present. The rituals of tradition help us to remember and to pay attention. Pay attention to the past and the present. Rituals help us to look up. Rituals like the Seder help us to rise. So it was to celebrate the Passover that the Rabbi Jesus of Nazareth enters Jerusalem and is greeted by crowds, the poorest of the poor, gathered, oppressed by the Romans, gathered to celebrate freedom in a city besieged by these foreigners. Gathered in search of liberation, they throw what they can at his feet. Hosanna, Hosanna, pleading to be saved. Disturbing the peace and perceived as a threat to the powers that be, that is the Romans, who were governing Jerusalem at the time, he is arrested, tortured and betrayed and crucified. And I do have to say a word about anti-Semitism, which begins right from the beginning of Christianity in the book of Matthew. And if you doubt me, there's a very wonderful book by Rosemary Ruther called Faith and Fratricide, in which, again, as I mentioned earlier, the false claim that Jesus was killed by fellow Jews. The anti-Semitism runs throughout Christianity, and it's another sermon, but it needs to be pointed out here. He was crucified by the Romans. Had he been killed by the Jews, he would have been stoned, not crucified, etc. He dies in the heart of his beloved tradition, Passover, a day after celebrating a Seder with his followers in this his holy city, at the hands of those who feared him the most. And so the story goes, and on the third day, which was the first day of the week, he rose from the dead. We who have experience with sap running again in our maple trees, we who have experience with crocuses coming up through this winter, we who have seen caterpillars become butterflies, seen love come again to the divorced and broken, we who have felt the miracle of forgiveness in a child's smile, seen the compost pile transformed into soil, seen the soil transformed into lettuce, we who have seen the barn swallows return, who are we to doubt? If we have known the least of the signs of spring, Who are we to doubt that our loved ones rise from the dead on the third day? Who are we to doubt that we are reborn, that they are reborn to us in and of the Spirit, springtime after blessed springtime, remembrance after blessed remembrance. Love supersedes morning after morning. Love supersedes injustice and death. Believing, however, is different from wanting. Freedom triumphs over enslavement, but can we bear the desert on the way to home? Can we bear the goodbyes, the letting go, the transition in the wilderness between what we have known, though it be slavery and blindness, the transition from that to the promise of the Spirit of freedom of rebirth? Can we bear the deadness peeled back, the grave clothes of Lazarus sloughed off, the force of new leaves and blossoms insistent on rebirth? Can we bear such demand for life, such longing of the bloom itself? Can we bear so much life, so perfect a love? Do I really want to see a man risen from the dead? Does Mary see Jesus as a gardener, perhaps because it is easier to see a gardener than a loved one come back to life? Easier to see a gardener than holiness in time? Do the two friends, 7 miles from Jerusalem, fail to look up for good reason? In Eugene O'Neill's plays, Lazarus Laughed, no one could stand the resurrected man, so full of God, one so in love with God. And so they had to bury him again. How can we bear this spring after holding so long to our safe winter abodes? How comfortable the stone in our way of joy. How we cherish our unenlightened habits as comforts. Sorry, I just had this flash of my whiskey at 6 o'clock all the way through COVID every night. We forget to look up. We forget to pay attention. And we quite intentionally sometimes do not look up. Don't roll away my stone just yet. Leave me to my routines, my habits, my rituals. Moses says to God, don't send me. Leave me amidst the walking dead of those of us who function successfully but are spiritually asleep. Was it the death Jesus wanted taken away as he prayed in the garden, or was it the crucifixion he begged God to take away? Was it the crucifixion he begged God to take away, or was it the resurrection? What tenderness in leaving the body once and for all. What dizzying act of spirit might this be to return to loved ones unfettered by matter, motivated only by love? What heart could bear such radiance? The sun so intense this morning on this tired land, the stones at the entrance of the pond heated through in places, hold the dead grass of a year gone by. The cattails bend dried old letting go. He was not there. The stone at the entrance was rolled away and he was not there. The two great stones in the history of Western culture, not counting Moses' stone tablets, the two great stones, the stone of Sisyphus, who pushes continually pushes the stone up the mountain over and over again, and the stone Jesus pushed away. We can keep pushing our stone up the mountain day after day, as most of us do, or we can roll it aside as easily as Jesus did. He just rolled it aside and kept on with the business of love. But the stone can't roll until the snow melts, until our death becomes part of our story, without reluctance or resentment. The Passover story includes and is dependent upon the horrors of slavery, the terrible 40-year passage. The Jews are slaves in Egypt. Jesus is laid out in a cave with a stone blocking the entrance, the stone too heavy to move, rolled into place by a legion of Roman soldiers, the history of militaristic might, to block the entrance, to block the exit, to block the Spirit from its ascent. There are days like this for all of us, yes? Days where we are laid out amidst the busyness of our lives, with a stone the size of this building blocking our vision, a stone of knowledge without wisdom, a stone of anger, a stone of defeat and fear. The message of Passover and Easter, I hear, is that the enslaved can rise. Even someone dead can roll away that stone. It is never too late to rise like the mist of the pond, to free our souls from the slavery of fear. She came to the tomb while it was still dark and wept. She turned into her grief, and only because she did, only because she turned, think Hasidic tradition of turning, only because she turned, she came to see he was no longer there, but instead angels where his feet and head had been. About 7 miles from Jerusalem, on the same day Mary stood weeping, two friends walk home from a period in their lives which they still cannot grasp. A year spent following the rabbi who spoke of forgiveness, who dared, by the way, he was not the only rabbi of the time speaking of forgiveness. Attributing forgiveness to Christianity and not to Judaism is a complete misunderstanding of the Hebrew scriptures. Sorry, I just had to throw that in. Following this rabbi who dared to question the Pharisees' oppressive laws, who, when you talked to him, looked you in the eye, who felt loved, you felt loved in a new and deeper way. About 7 miles from the organized religion center, from the political power, about 7 miles on the third day, a sacred time and place. Plato, by the way, sets the dialogue about love outside of Athens. That there's a tradition of being outside the city center where things happen. Moses is many, many miles away from his people when God comes to him to tell him to return to Egypt to let his people, to save his people. One must let go of the hurly-burly, away from the familiar, to turn, to address matters of the heart, to be loved, to become real. What is real? Asked the Velveteen Rabbit. Real isn't how you are made. It's a thing that happens to you. Traveling in broad daylight, going back from Jerusalem with nothing to hide and still in the dark, these two friends walk in an unreality. Their belief and hope is at a dead end. Their identities are shattered. How naive they had been. The prodigal son in reality is not welcomed home, not forgiven, not reborn. They walk in measured conversation, their feet burning on the sandy road. Without the hope they have just abandoned, their pace is slow, unnoticing of much around them. Neither suddenly nor from afar appears a stranger, one who draws near and breaks into their conversation. They stop and look, trembling, as one commentator writes, on the brink of an unbelievable gladness, yet unable to look, unable to bear the light. So attached they are to their sadness. Their doubt confirmed. Yes, we dared to hope, but now we see our doubt was right all along. Death happens, politics prevails, winter never ends. And so Jesus asks what they're talking about. They don't look up. They answer his questions. They answer, the state has put Jesus to death, but we had hoped. We had hoped that in his love for us and our love for him, a new reality might have emerged, that compassion might have become real, that we might have become real. We had hoped that he was the one, a living presence stood between them, and they did not lift their eyes to see. Finally, their eyes are open when he breaks bread with them later in the evening. And then he vanishes out of their sight. And isn't that always the way? We finally get it, some insight, some great realization about meaning, some moment in which we feel real. We feel loved primordially, loved by the abundance of this earth. And in what, a thought, the gladness, it vanishes out of sight. What is real? What is real? Real isn't how you are made. It's a thing that happens to you. As you are walking home in the light of day, when you are loved for a long, long time. It is 5:30, the sun is coming up with such warmth that the air lifts the water in the miracle of early morning spring. A patch of snow glistens in its dying day, melting around crocuses, patient and waiting. The snow, the grave clothes of the rising blooms, knows that it is time. Inside my study, the light is so bright, the bookshelves shine. The picture of Virginia Woolf stands in the slant of light. One whose pockets filled with stones walked into the water. One who then, through a lifetime in love with words, rose from the dead to bring me home. The stones of the west end of the pond, large and heavy, hold the warmth of the sun melting the snow and supporting the new grass stretching toward light. The birch stands perfectly still, white, as if in anticipation of the day the dawn predicts. On the first day of the week, this day, the day we begin again, she came to the place early while it was still dark. Turning into her grief, she wept and came to see through those tears that the stone of embodied life, the stone of her difficult heart, had been taken away. Reaching through her grief to another plane of her heart, to a deeper comprehension and a truer love. She turns and knows the divine finally for the first time. Able, when it calls her name, to answer. Amen. Bringing the gifts that my ancestors gave. I am the dream and the hope of the slave. I rise, I rise, I rise. And if you would sing together, hymn number 61, Lo, the earth awakes again, and rise as the Spirit moves you.
Awakes again, hallelujah.
Oh, Longfellow, Samuel Longfellow wrote those words. I just love that last verse. Change then mourning into praise, and for dirges anthems raise. How our spirits soar and sing, how our hearts leap with the spring. The earth unlocks her power once again. What we thought was dead is alive. What we thought was locked is open. May we ever trust in that simple fact. May we bless this earth with our imperfect but loving presence, with earth's forgiveness and through her grace. Amen.